You're listening to Speaking Sidemount, the podcast where we talk all things sidemount diving, from equipment, skills, techniques, and sidemount diving expeditions to interviews with some of the world's top sidemount divers. Whether you're new to sidemount, been sidemount diving for years, or just want to know more, this is the place for all things sidemount. I'm your host, Steve Davis. Let's get wet.
Hey, welcome back to Speaking Sidemount. I'm Steve Davis. This episode is sponsored by the brilliant XDEEP along with the support of the patrons of Speaking Sidemount. Huge thanks to both for their support that makes everything you're about to listen to possible. Like I'm sure some of you, I'm always amazed at the passing of time. How you look forward to something, bursting for it to happen, only for it to become a memory, hopefully a good one. I remember vividly in July 2018, 4 years ago to the day, sitting in my home office wondering how I can get more involved in diving. For a variety of reasons, I had given up on the idea of opening a dive centre in New Zealand or the South Pacific, and had set myself up as an independent sidemount diving instructor, teaching and promoting sidemount here in New Zealand. It was fun, but I felt that I had so much more to give, and I had no outlet to achieve this. I'd been watching clips of Joe Rogan's podcast on YouTube. Love or hate him, he had really interesting guests, and it was always super entertaining to hear the banter and their perspectives on everything from mixed martial arts to the likelihood of alien life in the universe. I also spent a heap of time on YouTube looking for sidemount content and had joined a bunch of sidemount, cave and tech diving Facebook groups. I occasionally participated, but was somewhat dismayed at the level of negative comments and petty arguments. I knew from my own experience that sidemount divers were hungry, rabidly so, for good information from reliable sources, and so the idea of Speaking Sidemount was born. I had no idea how to start a podcast, but thankfully there was some good information available on the internet, and this gave me enough to get started. The rest I'd learn on the job. Now, once I had the plumbing in place, a microphone, a headset, meeting software, recording software, editing software, podcast host software, some graphic design, and a Facebook page, I was ready to get started. But then the first barrier. What should I talk about? Was this going to be me pontificating on sidemount according to Steve Davis? Or was it going to be something much more? I recorded the first episode based on a popular blog post I had written a while back, titled 7 Reasons Why You Should Dive Sidemount. It was short, but I felt it was an important introduction for my listeners to me, the podcast, and the subject matter we were focusing on, sidemount diving. Next, I needed to make it bigger. I needed to get some of the very best sidemount and cave divers in the world on the show. But how? They wouldn't know me from a bar of soap, and why would they come onto my show? I spent some time answering those very questions for myself, and then I tentatively reached out to Steve Bogaerts and to Thomas Michur. Steve Bogaerts was instrumental in me choosing to become a sidemount and cave diver. He's a great speaker with a massive amount of experience and knowledge. It's interesting for me to listen to that episode now and hear how nervous I was, and also how standoffish Steve was at first. But I kept it together, I asked some good questions, and Steve did the rest. It set the pattern for what was to come, and to this day, it is one of my very favourite episodes. Interviewing Michur was an absolute buzz. He is one of, if not the greatest sidemount technician in the world. His level of stability while managing up to 10 sidemount cylinders has to be seen to be believed, and is a testament to the level of work and commitment that he has shown to, let's call it, his art. I wanted to know how he did it, even though deep down I knew there was no path to that level other than an absolute commitment to practicing often. Other luminaries or sidemount rock stars followed. Gary Dallas, Brian K. Cook, Jill Heinerth, Audrey Cudel, Patrick Woodman, and so many more. To date, I've produced 75 episodes, and we've had over 150,000 downloads. And even though this is an English language only production, our audience is definitely global. Not surprisingly, it's dominated by the US, UK, Canada, Australia, Mexico, and New Zealand. But there's also many listeners from Europe, Asia, South America, Africa, and the Middle East. It's been an absolute pleasure to host and produce this podcast, and I hope to be doing this for many, many years to come. It has to be said, though, that this is a mountain of work, and given the commitment level it takes, there is no way I could have done this or continued with it without the support of our podcast sponsor, XDEEP. I've dived XDEEP and loved their equipment for nearly 10 years now, starting with the Stealth Classic, which, believe it or not, I dived all the way to 4-cylinder open circuit trimix. I now have a Stealth 2.0 Tech dedicated to my KISS Sidewinder rebreather setup and another for open circuit and teaching. I have a Stealth 2.0 Rec as my tropical diving rig of choice. I'm using the XDEEP frameless masks and most recently the NX700 rigs for both open circuit diving and for my bailout cylinders for closed circuit. I only need a hood and I've got the complete set. I'm so proud and grateful to be working with XDEEP, and I'm mega excited to see what comes from the Blackwater group that now encompasses XDEEP, KISS rebreathers, and the Seal Dry Suit range. If you love the podcast and you're in the market for any of this equipment, then please take a look at these brands. Their design, manufacturing quality, and after-sales service is simply awesome. I also want to publicly thank and acknowledge Shearwater Research, who have supported the show and my diving. They too are at the very top of dive equipment manufacturers with the very best products and customer support that is literally legendary. And I can't forget Deluxe Dive Gear, another supporter of my diving, for their hose retaining bands, which are simply the best. Now lastly, I want to thank the patrons of Speaking Sidemount. It's so rewarding to read the messages of thanks and support, and the small amount that comes from this allows me to continue diving while producing the show. Alright, so let's get to it. The theme of this episode is Looking Back, the best of Speaking Sidemount, and huge thanks to Justin Ensman, a gold patron of this show from New York City, for suggesting that I have a crack at this. Now I have a segment with Justin at the end of this show, don't miss it. Now when I look back over the 75 episodes to date, I have many favourites, and a few themes stand out. The first was trying to glean some tips on how to get better as a sidemount diver, things like equipment setup, training, practice and skills. It's hard to go past Master Michur on this one, and these segments are from episodes 2 and 3.
And you saying that you're basically self-taught, or did you seek instruction from somewhere?
No, of course not. Okay, I enrolled for a course, okay, because I believe whatever I do, I never trust my intuition. I always do a proper course. One of my, let us say, rules is that every year I attend a different course from a different instructor. That's how I get experience. So I enrolled for a course, but of course that was not enough for me. So I studied Steve Martin's videos, I studied Steve Bogaerts' videos, Gary Dallas's videos, a number of guys going through the videos slowly, capturing every still that was available, or to see, oh, this guy is using that. And then of course, my experiment started. Yes. So I said to myself, why am I only copying? Maybe I could just try and do something on my own, and hundreds of hours in the water later. Okay, so with a camera on, okay, always recording myself, seeing and analyzing, I think I got it a little bit.
Yeah, I think so too. And that's the thing that strikes me. I mean, when I watch your videos, I mean, I look at you in the water and you're without a doubt one of the most stable divers I've ever seen. No fins, motionless, performing skills. How did you develop those skills to such a high level?
Okay, I have thought about this for a long time, to be honest. Not like, okay, gosh, why am I so good? No, nothing like that. But the thing is that it might come from the fact that I was a practicing musician. So drumming required from me a few hours daily. So that was some kind of regimentation, some kind of a routine that I had to perform. So the same went for practicing skills in the water every day, instead of like, I don't know, going practicing drums, because I gave it up. Because that's something that I should tell you, okay, I am not a multitasking person. I mean, when it comes to passions and hobbies, I got one hobby, I stay with that hobby, okay? Nothing else matters, right? So I gave up drumming, and instead of practicing for a few hours in the recording room, I went to a swimming pool, I went to the quarry, or I went for a diving trip. I set some targets, right? And I said to myself, today I'm working on back kick, yes? And that's what I heard from Stephen Bogaerts once, that a lot of people underestimate the importance of practicing skills in shallow water. Because if you can do that skill in 2 meters or 3 meters, there's no problems at 5, 7, 8, 10, right? When you perform a skill at 15 meters, then try and do it at 2, or maybe it's a little bit more difficult. The idea of practicing for me is the most important thing.
If you were talking to a sidemount diver who wanted to improve their skills, apart from the obvious of going to practice, what's the 1, 2, or 3 things that they really should emphasize in terms of becoming a better side mount diver?
Maybe what I will say right now at the beginning to start with, okay, will not be liked by everybody that can hear it, but I would say if you can't afford the side mount equipment, which is like a new BCD, a new harness, cylinders with special kind of valves or regulators, why can't you afford a side mount course from a professional? I'm not selling myself right now. I'm talking in general. That's what really, makes me wonder, because I understand that people say, I learned to practice the dry suit skills myself. I didn't need a course. But here, every centimeter matters, it, Steve. Okay, you move the sliding gearing, or you move the harness, or the harness is too tight, or the harness is too loose, and everything matters. And then they watch movies by Steve Bogaerts, and they say, it's all bullshit, they are lying to us. Because we can see in the videos, it's all perfect. I have the same equipment, and I can't get the same result. Yes. So I would first of all start with a course from an instructor that's pretty experienced in side mount diving, not the one that has the side mount diving instructor certifications, right? Yes. But the only time he was in the water was when he was getting the certification. Someone who's really into side mount diving, that's the first thing. Another thing is, as we said, repetition of skills, A buddy that is also a side mount diver, a camera. So when you get in the water and when you get yourself a camera, honestly, I have billion gigabytes of my footage from my sessions. Every time I go into a swimming pool, every time I go to a quarry, I always take a camera, I just put it somewhere and record myself. And then I analyze everything I do. Why did I move that hand so quickly? Maybe I should slow down a little bit. Maybe, if I do this that way, because, when we're in the water, the brain makes some tricks on us. So we might say that what we're doing is perfect. Then we see it on the video and we say, oh my gosh, I'm in a diagonal position, not in a horizontal position. So a camera is a very, very nice tool for improving everybody's skills. Then another thing I would recommend is planning. It's like, you go to a gym, you go to a fitness club, you plan the sessions. As like you say, 3 times a week I go to a fitness club, and on that day I do this and that, like chest. So today is Monday, as then on Wednesday we'll do the back. So why not do it when practicing other skills like side mount skills here? So back kicking on Monday, and something else. And on Wednesday, how about stowing the long hose, etc., etc. And of course, I would like to emphasize another thing, that it's not only skills, of course, that is required to be a good diver. We also have to dive. So skills is one thing, but also plan a trip every second weekend to go somewhere and together with friends and try to utilize the skills that you have managed to perform relatively well in the pool.
Yeah. Amazing stuff. And it's easy to understand how he's achieved his mastery of side mount. And I guess the challenge for the rest of us is to implement his advice of taking a course from a good instructor who dives side mount well and often, practicing with a camera, and then diving as often as we can. Now, as I mentioned earlier, I was inspired by Steve Bogaerts to take up side mount and cave diving. His skills video shot at Ponderosa in Yucatan, Mexico, many, many years ago now, is still to this day one of the very best. I interviewed Steve twice, and this produced 4 stellar episodes. The material is absolute gold, and I'd highly recommend going back to episodes 4 and 5, and then my later special releases of episodes 56 and 57, where Steve talks about his diving in Abaco, the Bahamas, and then the last episode where we talk about his career-ending DCS. It was gut-wrenching stuff. There are so many amazing segments, but here's a few of my absolute favorites.
You've been a key player in the immense growth of side mount, and I'm really interested in what your thoughts are on how side mount has evolved from the early days through to today.
Well, I think basically what happened, there was like a perfect storm of a lot of factors all coming together at the same time that caused the explosion in side mount diving. I mean, I've been side mount diving for quite a while before that video came out, or before we started producing some videos on YouTube. At the time, around about 2006, I was doing a lot of exploration, trying to connect Sistema Sakaktoon to Sistema Nahochna-Chich. Developed the razor for myself and for my own diving that I was doing. I started teaching some of my students in the razor. One of those students was HP. And obviously his interest was also in producing video and everything. And we were just really having fun with it. So he shot some video of me just playing around with side mount, hence the skills video that has been very popular with many people over the years. And just the fact that now people all over the world could actually see someone diving side mount, that it looked fun, that it looked comfortable, that it looked fairly easy to do. I think they were introduced to a technique or style of diving that very few people knew about before that time, because obviously it was a niche activity within cave diving. Prior to around about 2008, 2009, the majority of cave divers were diving in back mount. It was only really the cave explorers that were using side mount as a tool to facilitate their exploration. But after those videos sort of went viral, a lot of people all of a sudden thought, wow, that looks really cool. I'd like to try that. And obviously, side mount is an applicable equipment configuration, not just for overhead environment diving, but also for open water diving as well. And we also made some open water films. There's one in particular which was popular, which was a wreck dive on the Mamavinia. And obviously that got a lot of attention as well. So I think a lot of people all of a sudden sat up and took notice. They saw something they maybe never seen before, and it kind of looked interesting, and they gave it a try themselves. And they found out that they really enjoyed diving that way.
Yeah, it raises an interesting point, because for a long time you've emphasized that side mount can be used both in overhead and open water environments. But we also see a school of thought where many think that it's just a tool that should only be used for dives that require passing restrictions. How do you rationalize those two things?
Well, obviously side mount started in the cave diving environment. In fact, way back in sort of like the early 60s, it was being used as a technique for exploration in caves by the CDG in sumps in the UK. And because of the nature of that type of diving, side mount was really the only applicable technique that they could use, because logistically it was difficult to get back-mounted cylinders to the dive site because there's a lot of dry caving involved, and they had to crawl and drag their tanks with them. So it was actually called the English style of cave diving. Whereas if you look at what they were doing in France, where they were diving, in the springs there, and they could actually more or less kit up at the side of the spring and jump straight in. And they were using an independent back-mounted equipment configuration, which was known as the French style. Later on, the Americans adopted the English style. They modified it slightly to do some further exploration in the caves of Florida. But for the first sort of 50 or 60 years, just about, of its history, side mount was really the preserve of cave divers and very much of cave explorers. And outside of that fairly niche community and that fairly small group of divers, no one really knew too much about side mount. So no one thought to use it in open water. But there's no reason why it can't or shouldn't be used in open water. To be a purist and say that because side mount was born in the cave and therefore can only be used in the cave seems to me to not really make a lot of sense. It's a very limiting argument. And at the end of the day, if you find an equipment configuration that you're happy with, that's comfortable for you, that you feel safe using, why not use it in an open water environment or as a recreational diver? I see really no issue or problem with that.
And I guess some of the discussions around long hose, short hose, two short hoses, DIR, and donating what you breathe all relate to that as well. And I've seen some really interesting discussions around those and decisions made which then guide the rest of the equipment configuration. What are your thoughts on some of that?
Okay, so I basically think that first and foremost, we need to look at the environment you're diving in, and we need to base the equipment we're going to use on that environment, but also on the type of diving that you're going to do. So there's no one equipment configuration that's going to work for every single individual in all environments for all particular dives. You really need to have that first and foremost in your mind. Choose the right equipment for yourself, the dive you're going to do, and in the environment you're actually in. Now, having said that, side mount as an equipment configuration works really, really well in pretty much every environment. Now, are there going to be some individual preferences people have to configure their equipment a certain way that they're comfortable with? They come from a previous equipment configuration that makes certain skills more comfortable for them. They're more used to doing them a certain way. So therefore, when they dive side mount, they want to have a carryover with those skills because they built up muscle memory. Then that makes total sense. And in fact, when I was designing the Razor system, and as I said, this whole holistic approach to side mount and the Razor training program, it was very much bearing in mind that people were coming into side mount at that time as experienced technical divers, as experienced cave divers, and they were used to diving a long hose, for example, and diving a short hose as well. And so that was where my thinking came from, that if I could keep the equipment configuration as close as possible to what people were using already, the skill transfer was actually not that big, and it meant they got up to speed much faster. They were a lot more comfortable, much more quickly. And at the end of the day, it works really well. I had various levels of training. So at the basic side mount level, where people are diving in the open water or maybe in the overhead environment, depending on what their current level of certification is, they may be diving either solo or in a team. They may be diving just with other side mount divers, or they may be diving in mixed teams with back mount divers or with rebreather divers. Then they need an effective way of being able to share gas with other divers. And the best and easiest way to do that is using a long hose. So again, it made sense to keep the long hose on the right tank, keep the short hose on the left tank, and have a transfer of skill from what people already knew. Beyond that level of training, at the advanced side mount level of training, where people are in true side mount cave, then the long hose doesn't actually really confer any advantages to you. In fact, has a number of disadvantages. So at that higher training level, the long hose is gone, and now you have two short hoses, because you're either diving solo or you're diving with other side mount divers. So it's extremely unlikely that you're going to have two catastrophic failures that force you into a gas sharing situation in the first place. If that did happen for whatever reason, and there is still a possibility, however remote, then the easiest way to gas share in this type of environment is actually to pass off a cylinder to another diver so you can remain completely independent. It's very, very difficult to share gas using a long hose if you've got to negotiate through multiple restrictions, which may be longer than the long hose, and maybe you're doing that in zero visibility. Maybe you have to remove and replace equipment while you're doing that. So now long hose becomes impractical. It's a potential entanglement hazard. It's a potential entrapment hazard. So you're far better off. You're going to be able to move more efficiently. It's going to be safer and simpler actually for the divers to be semi-independent at this point in time. And actually to do a cylinder exchange is a comparatively simple and easy skill to perform, and anyone diving at the advanced side mount level should be able to do that comfortably without too much difficulty. The idea that you have to donate the regulator from your mouth in all circumstances, for me,
you may have breathed it 2 minutes ago. It's not like a back mount where
you're breathing them consistently, right? If you're diving in side mount, you should be pushing from one cylinder to the other consistently throughout the dive. So if you happen to be breathing on the short hose when someone tells you they're out of gas, it's a comparatively simple thing to donate your long hose. It should be on a breakaway connection anyway. It's on a clip, so you could unclip it. You should be able to break it away. And it's very rare that gas sharing emergencies are instantaneous. All of a sudden you get a signal from someone, you turn around and there's someone going, I'm out of gas, and it's a complete surprise to you. In reality, the chances are that you're aware that your partner, your buddy, has an issue and may need to share gas. So you can be prepared ahead of time to start sharing gas with them. And then obviously, as I said, at the advanced side mount level, where a long hose isn't really going to be an advantage for you, now you really want to change your equipment configuration, but it's a very minor change. Okay, all you're doing is putting a short hose on. Pretty much everything else stays the same. And so in my equipment box, I basically have the same two regulators set up identically, but depending on what I'm doing, either I screw a long hose with a right-hand delivery second stage into that first stage, or I screw a short hose into that first stage with a left-hand delivery second stage. But it's a very comparatively simple, quick, and easy equipment change to make. And then I have the perfect equipment set up for the type of dive I'm doing and for the environment I'm diving in.
Now, when we think about cave exploration, most divers shudder at the thought of passing a significant no-mount restriction and what that requires. And obviously there's a massive skill set, but I think more than that, there's a massive mental edge or mental requirements in doing that. Talk us through how you develop both the skills and the mental aptitude for passing major restrictions.
Yeah, I agree with you. Absolutely. Skills are important, but also the mindset is very important. Comfort levels are very important as well. And that's an evolving process. So as you become a better diver and you're doing more challenging dives, obviously you're basically getting better and you're getting more comfortable doing these type of dives. And the type of dives that I would do now, I wouldn't have done like 10 or 15 or 20 years ago. Some of the problems that I might have today, which I can deal with comfortably without too much stress, might have killed me 20 years ago, because I wouldn't have been able to handle them on an emotional level, on a psychological level, because they would have been too far out of my comfort or experience zone at that time. So it's all about making progressive penetrations. And, anyone who's done any type of cave training or cave diving will understand the idea of making progressive penetration. And that applies to everything that you do in diving, but particularly in overhead environment diving, which is that you need to build up your experience. And that takes time, and there's no substitute for real world experience, going out, doing the dives, and just gradually getting more and more experience and getting more and more comfortable in this environment. I can still clearly remember when I did my early cave training and we were practicing sharing gas through a single file restriction. And I remember thinking, wow, this is pretty small. And now I look at those same areas and I'm like, yeah, it's not even really a restriction. So, your whole mindset will change over a period of time as you gain more comfort, more experience in the environment. Now, equipment is important, training is important, and if you get a solid foundation in that, it's going to speed up the learning process, and that's great. But unfortunately, what I see now is people trying to shortcut the experience part of it. Yeah. And there really is no shortcut for that. That's about going out and just getting the dives in between courses and building up your experience. And it takes time and it takes dives, and there are no shortcuts. Okay? I mean, I wish that when I started Sidemount diving, the courses I offer now were available then, because I would have become a much better Sidemount diver much sooner. The danger of that is maybe it gives me a false sense of confidence, or it gives me the idea that there are dives that I could go and do, or areas of the cave that I could get to. I might have the training, I might have the equipment, I might have the skills, but I do not have the experience. I do not have the comfort level probably to be diving there safely. And if something happens, who knows what the outcome is going to be.
How do you guard against that complacency on one hand and overconfidence on the other? I mean, you've done a lot of training, you've started to build experience, you're pushing some restrictions, especially if you get onto the exploration side, where I'm assuming you're pushing into restrictions where you don't really know where it's going to go. How do you judge when it's time to push forward versus when it's time to pull back?
Well, the way I describe it to people is whenever I'm diving, I have an angel on one shoulder and the devil on the other shoulder. Mm-hmm. And the angel's always giving me good advice, and that's the one I really want to listen to. And the devil is always trying to tempt me to do things that I know are silly or stupid or potentially dangerous, and I really don't want to listen to this guy. And every time I have, I've got myself into trouble. So the key is listening to that inner voice and making sure that you use a little bit of common sense and that you respect the limits of your training, but also the limits of your experience. And you expand those limits gradually. You don't try to run before you can walk. So, as much as an instructor might stress during a course, hey, take it slowly, build up your experience gradually, get some more dives and experience in between doing the next course and everything else. It really is up to the individual to make sure they temper what they're doing. Caves aren't going anywhere. The wrecks aren't going anywhere. So there's no point risking your life to make a dive. There's no wreck or cave that's worth dying for. So just take your time, build up to these dives gradually. It's part of the journey. To be honest, when you actually reach your goal, very often it feels great for that moment in time, but afterwards it's a bit of an anticlimax because it's like, okay, what's next? So enjoy the journey, take your time, enjoy the whole process. And then when you get to the goal, you think, I did it the proper way.
Now, Edd Sorenson is a literal cave diving legend. In addition to his exploration of the caves of the Florida Panhandle, he is one of the original members of the International Underwater Cave Rescue and Recovery Team. He's been involved in several successful cave rescues and, sadly, a number of cave recoveries. In particular, Edd is renowned as having the temperament and skill set to be able to undertake cave recoveries that are at the very limits of what is possible.
When Henry Nicholson started the IUCRR in 1999, it was a by-invite only. A friend of mine was chosen for the regional coordinator for Oregon, Washington, and Idaho. He was supposed to handpick his team, and he picked me, and it was just the two of us. I did my first recovery in 1999 or 2000, I think, when I was on vacation in Florida, in the water, ready to start my dive, when a guy came up and yelled, "Help, help, help," my wife. So I got right to that too.
Yeah, obviously it's become quite topical since Thailand. And look, mistakes in cave diving usually result in recoveries, but you've been involved in a bunch of successful rescues. Can you share a little about those?
Yeah, I guess it's the location more than anything. One of the things Henry Nicholson said when he first was doing the training was there are no cave rescues. By the time we're called, it's almost always a fatality. So being right here by the water, just minutes away, All my stuff is always ready. My tanks are always full. My guys know that if we get a call, they can load my truck and have me ready to leave the driveway in 5 to 7 minutes. So it's really worked out well for several fortunate people.
Yeah, so time seems to be the major factor there, and having someone capable on site makes a massive difference to an outcome, I guess.
Yeah, and a lot of people don't realize what it takes when you're looking for a person. All the rescues I did were in complete zero visibility because they had started up, got lost off the line, what have you. So, there again, this all just came natural to me. When I get in the water, I'm very quick to think on the fly. So I can't see. All I'm doing is feeling around. Well, you only have about a 6-foot arm's length. So I would stop breathing and listen for any kinds of sounds or noises. And with the 2 students that the instructor left in the water to die, that's how I found them. I just listened. I could hear them. So it's just one of those things that you really have to know how to think on the fly.
Yeah. All of us who are cave trained and cave divers, we've been through the experience of practicing that drill, right? Losing the line, lost diver drills and so on. But it must be a completely different exercise doing it for real.
Yeah. It was interesting listening to the 2 students that I had rescued when they were doing their incident report with the sheriff's department and listening to what they went through and how they had done lost line drills in class. And they said, yeah, it's nothing like that. That's one of the things I've been doing for many years is I tell my students, a lot of the things I'm going to teach are not in books because I don't teach for class. I teach for real life. So that's what makes some of my classes quite unique.
Interesting. So the other thing that you're known for is making recoveries beyond the scope of most rescue teams. And your recent successful recovery with Mike Young in the Dominican Republic is an example of that. What specific skills are you bringing or employing that make the difference in challenging recoveries?
Well, I've done several that were quite difficult. I got a call out in about 2012. The guy that used to be the NACD president, Jeff Bauer, he was the first IUCR diver called for the recovery because of his proximity to the cave system in Tallahassee. And he located the body right away, but the guy was in such a small hole and his body was wedged on the other side of it. And after dive, and he just couldn't get him out. And he just told the sheriff's department, it's impossible. And they said, well, we got to do something. What do we do? And he said, well, there's only one guy I know that's even crazy enough to attempt this. I'll call him. So I went over there and it took me 7 dives over 8 hours and he was through a complete gear off restriction and then stuck on the other side. So I had to find another way in that was even smaller and get him out. So like one of the guys, John Jones on the IUCR, he's one of the only 2 that teach the IUCR classes, him and Lamar. He said, well, unfortunately, Ed, you have the reputation that when it's impossible, call Ed. So there again, it just boils down to, can you think on the fly? When they've been in there a while, it's an unpleasant sight, if you can see. But it's all about going in with a plan. Everybody has a plan if they know anything about the conditions or the circumstances or the tunnel. But when plan A doesn't work, do you have a plan B? Do you have a plan C? Can you make up a plan D? So for this particular one, they had located the body and they had some really great divers over there working on it. They had a lot of great support. The Dominican Navy was fantastic in everything they did, the park personnel. So everything was made as easy as possible for us. But when the people that were over there working on it sent me a small video of this guy trapped in there, the first thing that came to mind is, well, if an open water diver can get in there, it can't be that difficult. Well, once I got in there, I thought, there's no way he got in here. There was so many small restrictions that it's almost physically impossible for him to even be there. So it was, it must have been just panic and sheer terror that drove him or the 2 of them to get where they got. But I have a harness that I designed back in 2012 on another small, tight recovery. And there again, it was just a look at what we've got to work with, what are we going to need to do, and how are we going to get this done? So I made this harness, and it's got a loop back here behind the neck, and then it goes down around the armpit, back through the loop, down around this armpit, back through the loop. So it's pulling from the entire torso, because when you get a body, especially in very warm water like that, that's been in it for a length of time, you know, the body starts to decompose. So you don't want to start pulling off body parts. But so having this harness already designed and made up really helped. A lot of times plan B was sometimes they just can't come out forward because of swelling in the body, size of the restriction, shape, how jagged is it, these kind of things. So sometimes it's easier to pull the body out backward. So I have another harness that I made, and it has a loop that goes around the waist and then goes through the loop around and out that loop down. And then I have another loop down by the kneecaps. So it goes around a leg, back through the loop, around that leg. So now it's pulling on two separate places evenly, and it keeps the legs together.
Right.
So I already had those two harnesses made up and in my pocket. Mike and I had never done a recovery together. I usually do all my body recoveries by myself. But I knew during the length of time and the state of the bodies and the tight restrictions that it was going to take both hands. I was going to have to come out backwards. So I said, you know, I need you to hang on to my leg with one hand, the line with the other. And then he had to line me up through the zigzag tight restrictions so I didn't get lost off the line, you know, and it freed me up to just concentrate on the body, how we're getting them through the restrictions, and so on and so forth. Another thing with the state of the bodies at that length of time is parts sometimes come off. So I also had a bag that I put over the head, and it helps protect the head. I always try and bring people's bodies out in as good a shape as I can possibly bring them out. They're going to have to identify the body. I don't like to do any more damage to them coming out than I absolutely have to. So the bag helps protect the head, plus it's got drawstrings up tight. So if it happens to come off during the recovery, I can pick it up.
Man, it's certainly grim work, isn't it?
It really is. I had a couple guys on a very difficult recovery that I had to, the hole was so small, I had to have help pulling him through, and they had volunteered to help. And when the head came through the restriction, they both bolted on me. And so it's not for everyone. And some people really get, you know, PTSD type symptoms afterwards. Yeah. To me, it's just a job. And my main and really my only concern is, how do I get this family some closure? Yeah, Mike and I were good friends. You know, I was diving his Kiss Gem prototype back in the 2008 or something. And I thought it was supposed to be a recreational rebreather, but I thought I could turn it into a side mount rebreather. It would help with this big exploration I was doing that had really tight restrictions. And then later on, the Sidekick. And then when he gave me the Sidewinder to work on, he didn't even tell me what it was. He just called me and said, "There's a new toy coming." And I said, "Great, but what is it?" And he wouldn't even tell me. He said, "It'll be in the mail." So when it got there, I looked at it and I went, "What is this?" And
looks like a couple of thermos flasks, right?
So, you know, I really had a lot of fun with that. When I first got it, I thought, well, it looks interesting. It looks unique. I'm not going to dive it for what I do, but you know, I was happy with my Sidekick. So, but the more I dove it and the more we did in developing it and got it really tight, really neatly slung, the work of breathing is phenomenal. And I just loved it more and more and more and more. And that's pretty much all I dived. So.
Yeah, and it's super interesting to me because I'm looking at side mount rebreathers right now. I'm a side mount diver through and through, and I don't really want to go to back mount. And I'd looked at the Sidewinder and thought that it was kind of a recreational unit. And maybe sometimes you base things on the size of the package. And I was talking to Mike Thomas, who I know is trained with you on the Sidewinder. And Mike said, "No, this unit, man, I use it and it's fantastic." So I started doing some research, and the video and the comments from students and divers using the Sidewinder is really, really compelling. And for someone like me, you know, the things I don't want to give up from my open circuit experience is the balance, the trim, the stability that I have in that, and worker breathing is always an issue.
So talk us through some more your thoughts on that with respect to the Sidewinder.
Well, that's one of the things that I liked most about it is obviously at first I was the only one diving it. And when it was ready to go to the market, I think it came out in February of 17. I did the first class in December of 2016 on what Mike called the beta production model. So it was, we think this is how we're going to put it out. Tell us if you want us to change anything. Because I came up with the back plates that fit most of the, that fit all the different harnesses. I came up with a coupling system that clips it on. I had come up with an idea. I pitched it to Mike. It was kind of complex and convoluted. And he built this cage to go around it to hook it on. And it's all made out of TIG welded stainless. And it's such a work of art. I need it hanging on the wall. But then one dive and I went, yeah, this is terrible. And then I went back to hose clamps and bolt snaps and, keep it simple. Anyway, so from cleaned parts to done and on the trailer or on the truck tailgate is about 16 minutes. So that's scrubbers packed, linearity checks done, everything ready to go. But the balance and trim, when I do try dives for people, a lot of rebreathers have a big learning curve and buoyancy is difficult. This thing, I've got hundreds and hundreds of pictures of people. One girl, a girlfriend of my dive partner, she probably only had 40 or 50 dives out of cave class. And I put her in the thing and she looked like she'd been diving it for years in the first minute. So it trims out so nicely if it's put together properly. I have seen a lot of people lately that I'm not real certain about how they were taught to set them up, but they're super tight. Anything my chest will fit through, I can go through. And he said, where are you going? And I told him, and he said, well, you can't fit through that restriction in that. I said, everybody says that, and I'm tired of hearing it. And I said, so I'm just going to take a camera, I'm going to hold it out here, and we'll see. And one of my students, or former students, was sitting at the picnic table working on his laptop, and he looked at me and he goes, wait a minute, let me get this straight. You're going to go 9,000 feet back through a restriction that everybody on the planet says you can't make it through by yourself. And I said, yes. And he goes, what if you're wrong? I said, well, then I'll have a bad day. He goes, you're going to die? I said, no, I'm not going to die. I said, I've got plenty of open circuit bailout with me. I said, it'll just be a long open circuit swim out. So I did. And I ended up taking that selfie footage, and a buddy of mine here at work, he put it together in a little video that's on the Cave Adventure Facebook page called 8 Inches of Fun. Anyway, when I got back, Jason Richards looked at that raw footage and he goes, I'll take 2. And so he bought him and his wife one right there on the spot.
When I spoke to Mike Thomas, and also when I read the specs on the Sidewinder, it mentions in there, because it's in 2 canisters, that it's not as well suited to cold water. But I know for a fact that Mike's diving in pretty cold water. So where is the limit with the Sidewinder around water temperature and so on? Or is there actually a limit?
Well, you know how Sorb works. So the colder the water, the less efficient. It's basically how do you keep those cans warm? So when I did Mike's class for him, we did it in France in around 48, 49 degree water. So we were doing 3+ hour dives and I had no problems. Ever since I got the Sidewinder project, every time I hear that there's a problem, then I'll push that to see how far I can take it. Early on, it was, you get any water in it, you're going to die. So I flooded that thing numerous times, putting more and more and more water into it, and it just never became a problem. We eventually made a dumpable counterlung. Once anybody dives it for very long, they realize they don't need it. But with the cold, a friend of mine was diving my unit up in Canada in 39 degree water, and I said, well, what's the longest dive you did, Mike? And he goes, it's 39 degrees, Ed.
How long can I stay here?
So, it's still good for several hours, even in 39 degree water. And I'm not good for several hours in 39 degree water. No. They make the syntactic foam, which keeps the heat in. And if you're going to dive really, really cold, they have the heated canisters now. So there's virtually no cold issues whatsoever.
Okay, well, let's push the other limit. So the Sidewinder is rated to 91 meters, 300 feet. How does it perform for Trimix dives?
Excellent. I don't do deep much anymore. I've only had it to about 310, but the work of breathing is phenomenal. It performs phenomenally. It's just a great unit. The reason that it has a depth rating at all is because it's got the blocked orifice, not because anything's going to implode. So I'm running mine with the adjustable needle valve, and so it pretty much has no depth limit. You know, I'm getting old, so I don't have the burning desire to go 4, 5, 6 feet anymore. I get bored on that much deco, but if I needed to go there, I would have no worries, no concerns at all taking the thing to 300 or 400, 500 feet.
It's just over 4 years ago since the world held its collective breath while a group of amazing divers came together from all over the world to help 12 boys and their coach who were trapped in the Tam Luang cave system in northern Thailand. The subject of the Thai cave rescue was one of Speaking Sidemount's most requested subjects, and I produced 4 episodes on the rescue, talking with support divers Eric Brown and Michur Pasi, Chris Jewell from the British Cave Diving Group, and the #1 most downloaded episode with Dr. Richard Harris. Even to this day, it's hard to comprehend how this stellar rescue was accomplished, and there is no doubt the assembled skill sets of the divers and support teams was key in the outcome. Up next, I speak with Harry and we discuss his involvement in the rescue.
I just want to warn you, you're going to dive to the end of the cave. You're going to see these kids, they're all looking healthy and happy and smiley. Then you're going to swim away and they're probably all going to die.
Yeah, that's what Rick Stanton said to me, almost word for word, as best I could recall, when he rang me on that Thursday morning to say, I think we need you guys to come and give us a hand, and what do you think about sedating the children? That was his brainchild, that little gem. I'd been keen to get involved in this rescue, there's no question, and Craig as well. We'd been in communication with Rick and Ben Raymond's. You know, we'd been following the story, and because we're involved in cave rescue training at least, you know, it'd be a lie to say we weren't pretty keen to get over there and give them a hand. And so maybe my boyish enthusiasm came down the line, and then Rick turned around and said that little pearl, and I went, right, good point. Maybe I should curb my enthusiasm a little.
Yeah. So when you turned up in Thailand, I mean, what presented itself to you?
It was a scene of madness. It was like a war zone. You know, we got off the bus up at the cave rescue site. Craig was actually a little bit behind me. He missed a flight. And so he arrived an hour or two behind me. So I can remember getting off the bus. The first thing I did was open the van door, and there's this sea of cameras, like a paparazzi scrum like I'd never seen in my life. That was completely intimidating. So, you know, head down and through the crowd, and all I wanted to do was find Rick and John and talk to them and find out what the cave was like.
Sure. And what happened when you met up with Rick and John?
Well, they were pleased to see us. I mean, they'd had a very stressful time of it. You know, they'd been there for a week by then. They knew the lay of the land very well. They were the guys who found the boys. They were the guys who laid the line through the cave. I mean, let's not forget what an extraordinary dive that was. You know, to bat your way into very powerful flood waters, zero visibility, a cave you've never been in before. No real sense of how dangerous it was, probably. I mean, you know, they didn't know whether a big flood pulse was about to come through and just spit them out of the cave, and, you know, very, very dangerous and difficult and physical dive. And they laid, you know, a couple of kilometres of line with the help of Ben Raymond and some other guys. But, you know, the British did the lion's share of that. And to navigate through those conditions, belay a line, you know, half decently, to be honest. It wasn't just line, it was caving rope. So they're dragging these big sacks of rope through that water and then surfacing in after every sump into a canal section and, you know, wondering, is this it? Is this where we're going to find these bodies of these boys? Because everyone assumed they were dead by then. And then finally surfacing in Chamber 9, Rick told me that he took his mask off and the smell in that chamber was so bad he thought he just was going to start seeing bodies in the water. And then these little boys running down the slope, turning their lights on. I mean, talk about emotional swings and roundabouts. Jesus, it's not your normal cave diving scenario. It's normally a lot more calm and peaceful than this. And it was bloody tight little dive. It was a flattener and it only went for about 10 metres, but it was full of water pipes and electricity cables, and it just felt like, this wouldn't be too bad if all this stuff wasn't in here. And then you pop up into chamber 3 and there's this oozy mud slope that you have to climb up, and your legs sink up to your knee in this liquid mud. And I think, oh, Lord, we're not even at the beginning of the diving and I'm going through all this stuff. Then sump 4, the first proper dive, some shocking line traps and vertical sort of keyhole restrictions, all zero viz, and you just, no, I'm not up to this. And then from there, it got a lot easier. Then it was just like a bit of a slog, a couple of kilometres of hand over hand, pulling on the rope, underwater, through the water, canals, wading, a little bit of dry stuff. A few more restrictions along the way, but nothing too terrible. And then surfacing into chamber 9, I remember looking up and seeing the shimmering water. The water was a bit clear as we went in up there and a little bit deeper. And then we surface in this big, long canal chamber. And I thought this must be it, because I knew by the colour of the line that the POMs had told us the line was going to change colour. And I was filled with a real apprehension at that point, because I suddenly, as the young people say, shit gets real all of a sudden. And I just thought, wow, we're about to meet these boys, and this is it. This is no longer just an adventure. This is people's lives. I actually immediately relaxed when I met the kids, because they were so happy and so upbeat. Their morale was amazing.
So once you met the kids, and obviously Rick had come up with this plan, as you mentioned, about sedating the kids. As an anaesthetist, how did you feel about that?
Oh, I was horrified at the suggestion. In fact, I told him straight out, no, can't happen. It's impossible. It's never been done before. Mm-hmm. I was 100% confident that it would end in 100% mortality for the children.
At some point, it obviously got to a position where the kids couldn't be left there and you had to do something.
Yeah, so I had 24 hours really to make my own assessment of what was going on. I mean, the Brits obviously had that time on the ground and time to eliminate in their own minds all the other options, including teaching the kids to dive, leaving the kids in the chamber for the duration of the monsoon, all the water pumping efforts, alternate entrance strategies, drill rigs, you name it. Everything was being tried, and all credit to the people involved in those things. But once I dived through the cave and seen how difficult it was, once I'd seen the kids, seen the environment where this anaesthetic might take place, I guess my views hadn't changed on the likelihood of success of the anaesthesia. I still felt absolutely convinced that this will end in the deaths of some or all of the children. But I realised that no other plan had any legs at all. Even the idea of leaving the kids in there for the duration of the monsoon, which I did really explore. I thought maybe this is the right way, rather than me actively killing these kids. Best let nature and the gods take its course. That seemed like a slightly easier option for me personally.
Yes.
But then I realised, there was no way to provision them with food for that period of time. Even if we could have taken enough food in there was probably no space to store it all. And the conditions they were living in were deteriorating, obviously, given that they'd had food and drink taken into them. The natural byproducts of that were that the environment was deteriorating pretty rapidly. The smell was something to be seen to be believed. Yeah, it was only a matter of time before they all started to succumb to various infections. A couple of the kids already had a moist cough. Their feet were sort of wet and manky for 2 weeks. They were going to die a very slow and unpleasant death if we left them. So it became clear to me that the only way out for these kids was completely asleep, fully anaesthetised. I still thought that will end with their deaths, but I guess the way I justified the plan to myself was that at least if they die, then they'll be asleep when it happens. I don't think I could live with myself if I walked away and just let them die this unpleasant death.
Yeah, it's a huge ethical dilemma, wasn't it?
Oh, terrible. And not a great justification for any sort of plan.
Obviously, there's the ethical issue, but professionally, this could have had a massive impact on you personally, couldn't it?
Oh, it would have been professional suicide, I'm sure. That would have been the end of my career. It would have had a profound personal effect on me, no doubt about that. And my wife was very worried about that, actually. She said afterwards, look, I wasn't worried about you and the cave. You go off cave diving and do this stuff for many, many years. She wasn't concerned about my physical well-being, but she was very concerned about the psychological outcomes if it all went wrong.
Yeah, and isn't it a funny world? We paint one picture where everything goes wrong, we paint a middle ground where it goes partially wrong and then we get the outcome that we did get?
You know, I'm cynical enough to know that the human condition is pretty fickle, and I've said to people before that, you know, we could have done this with the same intent, the same motivation, the same level of courage and goodwill, but if all those kids had died, we would have been villains, not heroes. And so I'm not taking any of this hero stuff too seriously, Steve, because it just as easily could have, you know, been the opposite.
But isn't that the definition of it? Isn't it when you do something knowing that the outcome could be tragic and very negative, and yet you do it anyhow? Isn't that one of the definitions of heroism?
Well, I don't feel like that, because I don't feel like I had any choice. You know, this is what, you know, it came down to, and that's what all the people there resign themselves to. And, you know, if I'm a hero, then so are 10,000 other people that are involved in this thing. You know, it's just something that we felt we had to do.
And maybe that's the best way to describe it, isn't it? 10,000 people came together from all around the world and pulled off something that was miraculous. Those of us who are cave divers are drilled and understand the importance of maintaining contact with the guideline. To lose the line is in itself stressful, but to lose the line while carrying one of the buoys from the cave during the Thai cave rescue is simply traumatic. In my next segment, Chris Jewell, cave explorer and key member of the British cave diving group, shares his story from the Thai cave rescue. I talked to Harry a bit in episode 37 about his experiences, and he mentioned your lost line incident. Yeah. And as soon as I heard that, I thought, man, I can just in my mind go through what you might have gone through. But the one added thing was you weren't just responsible for yourself at that time, were you? You had a child under your arm and you were trying to extract them several kilometres out of a cave. So can you share a little bit about that experience and what you went through and how you solved the problem that presented itself to you?
Yeah, you've absolutely hit the nail on the head there. The key bit there was having somebody else. And I remember at the time thinking, hey, if I need to, I can get out of this. You know, I remember thinking, I got a lot of gas, it's pretty warm. Other people come through this, so I've got a hell of a long time to look, right? And it's not a big passage. But crikey, I can't possibly contemplate leaving the boy here and trying to do that. That's just not an option. So it's back into the stuff that you learn when you train. All the standard stuff about sweeping with your arms to try and pick up that lost line. And I knew exactly where that line was. That's the thing. I knew it was diagonally up to my left, and I knew it had pinged, it'd been under tension, it slipped through my fingers, it shot back up amongst the kind of rocks up in the roof. I knew it was there somewhere. But no matter how much I swept and tried to get my hand up in there, there was just no way I could get at it. I did then realise, I thought, well, I know which direction this line goes in. So I thought, well, if I just go in that direction, it's not a big passage. I mean, it really wasn't huge. I'm going to pick it up as long as I keep sweeping. And so I went in that direction, kept sweeping. And rather than pick up that, I picked up an electrical cable. You don't normally find electrical cables in sumps, a bit of an unusual one, but picked up that electrical cable and then managed to follow that. And that electrical cable actually took me in a roundabout way back into the cave, which is really confusing. Surfaced somewhere I didn't recognise, and then realised where I was. And Jason came by, and then Harry came by. And then obviously Harry took the boy from me at that point. You know, I guess I was in the water disorientated or off the line for all of about 5 minutes, maybe even less. I managed to control my breathing to a reasonable degree, but absolutely, I could feel the adrenaline building and the heart rate going up a little bit at that point. So, yeah, put it this way, I don't recommend it. Hang on to that line. It's a good reminder, isn't it? A microsecond of complacency, a second where it just slipped out. I didn't grip the rope just quite tightly enough. This was on the third day. Everything had been going so smoothly that day. I'd done several trips in and out prior to that. I was pretty much out and I'd kind of nailed it. I felt like I knew the sump really, really well. And you're complacent for just a second and it gets you, right? So it's a lesson. Don't lose that concentration.
While tech diving has predominantly been a male pastime, women have been front and centre right from the very beginnings. And Speaking Sidemount has featured and will continue to showcase some of the very best divers in the world who happen to be female. Jill Heinerth is amongst the modern pioneers of both cave and sidemount diving. She has received numerous accolades for her exploration, has written books on sidemount and her exploration, and was my guest in episode number 9. I often talk to people about cave diving and nobody really gets it. They all think it's like an adrenaline sport like bungee jumping and we all know it's not. So it's in fact probably the opposite.
That's a really interesting point, because people always say to me, you're fearless. And I'm like, no, I'm not at all. People that are in cave diving for a long time are actually very risk averse. And like, I feel so strongly about that I'm actually writing a book right now that'll be released a year from now.
Awesome.
About my expedition story, but framed around the topic of fear, because I want to dive with people who are afraid, because it means they care about the outcome.
Exactly.
And so that we sort of played with pony bottles, and then it was like, yeah, this is dumb. Let's just hook tanks on our sides. And I didn't know anything about side mount diving. I took an old Sherwood Genesis BC and some bicycle inner tubes. And I had one that went across my shoulder blades and came out under my armpits. And the other one sort of down around my hips that was longer, that could sling the tanks. And they hung fairly horizontal, and it was just probably a mess. But as I remember it kind of worked. So that was my first sort of full-size double tank configuration. I learned to dive in Canada and then moved to the Caribbean islands and then eventually to Florida. And when I got to Florida to be properly certified in cave diving, they told me that we dive double tanks on our backs. Like, what's this side mount stuff? And by this point, I had a proper homemade rig. So I said, well, God, why would you want to do that? So I reluctantly tried doubles, thought it was just a horrible idea, dove them for years whenever I had to dive with someone wearing doubles, but always deferred back to my side mount rig.
I had the great pleasure to dive with and work for Audrey Cudel during my time at Gozo Technical Diving. She is an amazing side mount diving and cave instructor with an attention to detail that few can match, and is a terrific role model in the water. Here's a couple of segments from episode 10. When we talk about that detail, because I know, one of the great strengths you have is being detail oriented, what do you think the most important aspects a side mount diver needs to get right?
There's not only one. I mean, there's a series of steps, and that's what has changed for me over the past years. Before, when I started teaching side mount, we were kind of trying to guess what it should be like. Now it became more measured, and of course it starts with the side mount harness configuration, which is basically the same for any side mount system. So I'm not gonna change my way of adjusting a harness because somebody is coming with one brand or another. The adjustment basically will be the same on the placement of the D-ring, on the placement of the loop bungee, the measurement of the loop bungee, the kind of sliding system you want to use, the placement of dorsal plate, lumbar plate, which is very similar actually to the adjustment of harness on the twin set. So I come from the twin set world originally, and that's basically the same kind of adjustment you make. Without this setup being properly done, there's no way you can start configuring your cylinders. So when I talk about the cylinder configuration, I talk about the Jubilee bands placement on the cylinder, how high you're going to put them, is definitely based on your harness adjustments. So you can't jump to a set of cylinders if you have no side mount system adjusted for your size. And after, there's a couple of things you need to take into account when it comes to the cylinder's weight, for instance. You have to anticipate what's going to be the impact of the type of cylinder, the material of cylinder you're using, the type of water you're diving in, what kind of how it will affect not only your weighting, but the way you want to configure the cylinder so they don't fall down and look like rubbish and are not effective for the kind of cave dive you're preparing.
When we speak side mount, it's hard to go past the huge number of talented and passionate side mount and cave explorers and instructors based in Yucatan, Mexico. And yet Natalie Gibb stands out in the crowd. Her passion for caves and her perspectives on what it takes to dive the caves of Mexico made up a large part of episode 18. So tell me a little bit about your philosophy. So what's it like to do a course with Nat Gibb in terms of side mount diving?
I guess the main philosophy that we would have for any course that we teach is that your fundamental skills need to be very strong. Not necessarily when you come into the course, but by the end of the course. So the most important thing and the hardest thing, in my opinion, for a diver to learn to do is just to be still in the water. And from having a solid platform, from being able to be still, then everything else can happen, right? Because from being still, then a kick is just a movement of the fins, right? From being still, then air share is just a movement of your arms. So we work really on base skills first, fundamental skills, trim, buoyancy, breathing. Everything comes down to breathing in the end, right?
Mm-hmm.
And then from there, building a solid base of skills. And when people train with us, both me and Vince, it's not like a 4-day course or whatever course. We do days of training, and the days are often quite long as the student's okay with it.
Mm-hmm.
And it just takes as long as it takes to get them good, right? We try not to cut corners, and we try to make them as good as we can possibly make them, right?
As you're introducing someone into cave diving, what sort of things are you emphasizing?
Well, to love cave diving, if I can, first, and respect the environment, of course. And I think both Vince and I really try to emphasize like seeing a cave and reading a cave and understanding the cave itself, as opposed to just following lines. So navigational techniques based on seeing the negative space of the cave, the shape of the tunnels, the compass headings, back referencing and taking visual snapshots of where you are. Because where we are in Mexico, of course, the danger isn't depth. It's navigational error that everybody comes up against.
Earlier, I expressed my heartfelt thanks to the patrons of Speaking Sidemount. Now, as a special benefit for Gold patrons, they've been given the opportunity to come on the show and talk about themselves, their diving, and muse with me for a bit on various aspects of Sidemount diving. Now, in this episode, I catch up with New York firefighter, paramedic, cave diver, and open water instructor, and Gold patron of Speaking Sidemount, Justin Ensman. Hey, Justin, welcome to Speaking Sidemount.
Thanks a lot. I'm a big fan of the show.
Thank you, mate. Hey, and you've been a Gold patron for nearly 2 years now, and I want to start out just by thanking you so much.
Like I said, I'm a big fan. I love the platform. I get so much information from the other interviews you've done, and I can't tell you, I've played a number of them numerous times.
This episode is going to be one of your suggestions where I grabbed at least the parts that I've enjoyed and got a lot from over the 75 episodes that we've done so far. Like you said, man, listening back to some of the luminaries and the people I've spoken to, it's been awesome to be able to do that. And then I'm glad you guys get something out of it.
Total legends. You've had on like total legends and some like rock stars on, right, in diving. So yeah, it's great to listen to it. As a side mount lover and cave diver, I get such a kick out of it and a lot of information.
So tell us a bit about yourself.
Well, I'm here in New York City. I live in New York City. I'm a firefighter. I've been a firefighter for 22 years in New York City. I was a paramedic with the fire department before that, and I still dabble in as a paramedic as well. I love doing what I do. And as a hobby, I'm very passionate about diving. I love diving. I can't get enough of it. During the pandemic, I became an instructor, an open water instructor. If I'm in the water, I'm happy. I haven't been in the water for a few weeks, so I'm getting itchy.
Yeah, and my daughter's a paramedic, so I have some understanding of what you guys do. And thank you, because when I hear the stories from my daughter about what she does, it's just amazing.
Being a paramedic, the last couple of years have been interesting, but my whole journey has been interesting with it.
And so you live in New York City. Tell us a bit about the diving that you do.
It's different. It's interesting here. It's colder. It's greener. But it's beautiful. You get on good days here, it's just like being down in like South Florida sometime. Not as blue, but it can be just as clear and colorful. And there's a lot of marine life and a lot of wrecks up here. So that's kind of how I got introduced to it. I started in a quarry. I don't live far from the beach. I go there just to like get in the water. It's different. I do like to go down to southern Florida for my wrecks. I like to go to north central Florida for the caves. And during the pandemic, I got totally addicted going to Tulum in Mexico. I've been there a number of times now, and I'm counting until I can get back.
Yeah, we're going to talk about that some more. You mentioned you just became an open water instructor, but where did Sidemount fit into what you're doing, and how did that come about?
Well, I always wanted to dive. Ever since I was a kid, I was like fascinated with being underwater, but I didn't know anybody that dove. It's kind of weird. When I went to college, they always had the class in the book, but they never had enough students to take the class. So, I guess, New York City, you don't think of diving too much, but there's a good dive life here. My best friend got married in Costa Rica, and I was like, there's no way I'm going to Costa Rica without diving. So I took a class. Me and another one of my very close friends, we took a class for our open water, We passed here and then we went to Costa Rica and we did 2 days of diving and I was hooked. I got in the water and I was hooked. Not a bad place to do your first dives in Costa Rica, but I was totally hooked. And it was just like with many things in my life. Once I get a taste and I like it, I want to keep going and do more and more and more. My eyes, my imagination always was wreck diving. So I wanted to learn how to become a wreck diver. And I started doing all my technical diving up here. And I did trimix. Well, I started, as usual, most people do in doubles and, advanced nitrox and deco procedures. And I wasn't a big fan of doubles, I have to say. It wasn't the weight or anything. I just wasn't a big fan of the doubles. And my dive instructor at the time, who was a great dive instructor, and he was doing, let's call it open water side mount, kind of like a self-taught side mount. And I said, let me try that one day. He was like, maybe you'll like it. He had the Swiss Army knife, the Hollis SMS 100. And I put it on. I got in the quarry and I was like, I got out of the water. I was like, all right, who wants my OMS? I want to do this. I was addicted to it. Again, it was like self-taught open water side mount. And I proceeded to do the rest of my technical training like that. I did my trimix and advanced trimix and side mount. I did it here. And then I also did it in South Florida. I did a class side mount. And one of my best friends, who was also a firefighter here in New York, he got into diving and he went right into the side mount. His goal was caves. Mine really wasn't. I would see the pictures of it and it looked beautiful, but I was always like, man, if I take some time to do that, then maybe I'm missing out on wrecks. Finally did our cave training and man, was I hooked. I got inside Ginny Springs and I was like, this is awesome.
It's amazing.
All the stories I had heard, or all the videos, I had the Steve Martin videos and the Steve Bogaerts videos. All of a sudden, I just got into Ginny, and I was like, it all makes sense. I'm addicted. And that's pretty much what I've been doing for the last 5-6 years, just addicted to cave diving.
Brilliant. And you obviously went on to do cave training. Where did you do your cave training?
I did my cave training in Florida. His name is Cave Max, or Max Kuzmanatov, and an amazing diver and an amazing instructor. He doesn't have a lot of videos online, but he has one where he goes to the Fluffy Bunny Tunnel. So if you ever see the Fluffy Bunny Tunnel video, that's Max. You know what? Again, he got me and my friend into it and trained, and I was addicted to it. I couldn't wait to proceed. And my buddy and I, once we were certified, we were flying down to cave country a lot and just, I don't want to say exploring because that would be the wrong term, I guess. But we were diving.
Yeah, you've heard me say it. It's exploring for you, though, right? You've never seen that before, and it's something new, and it's like walking around a new city and saying, hey, I'm exploring the city. I love cave diving. I love wreck diving, but often we're following a line that someone else has laid, but it's new stuff for us.
I heard the term recreational cave diver. Lamar Hyatt used it in an interview once, and I was like, that's it. That's exactly it.
Exactly. Tell us a bit about your time going down to Tulum. What were you doing there?
Funny story, my friend and I, who I was talking about, who we got into cave diving together, we were supposed to go to Brian K. Cook's, a place in the Bahamas, the day they got hit by the storm. So a couple of years ago. So for a couple of days, we're watching the weather, and I'm calling Brian like, hey, man, this don't look good. Brian assured me that, the storms always go out. They always blow away. And I was like, you sure? He's like, I've been sure. I'm telling you. And he goes, even if it rains, the caves never flood, so we'll be okay. And I'm like, okay. So the day before the storm hit down there and we were supposed to leave, I woke up, grabbed my phone right away to check the weather. We were so excited to go down there. And as I'm checking the weather, all the alerts start coming over. Like my flight was canceled. Everything was canceled.
Right.
So Max, our original cave instructor, had just come back from Tulum. He had gone with a friend and they went to Tulum and he was telling us how great it was. So we were, JetBlue was willing to change our airfare. So we were like, hey, let's go to Cancun. And we just winged a trip. We were with like a local guide. We kind of stayed at a room that he rented out. I was in awe. I was like in total awe of the caves down there. And just, everything. Tulum's a wonderful little town. The caves, the experiences, I was in total awe. And on the way back from a cave, one of my fins actually flew out of the back of this guy's pickup truck. So I didn't know. We're back, we're unloading the truck. And I'm like, I'm missing a fin. So we drove back to the place thinking I may have left it there. It's not there. We come back to the room we're staying at. And I'm like, all right, I guess I got to buy a set of fins for the rest of the trip. And there was like, I guess the instructors down there have a Facebook chat. And one of the instructors from ProTech found it posted it in their private chat and said, if anybody's student or anybody know whose fin this is, and I always have N's, my last name, printed on my fin. Mm-hmm. So the guy told us where it was. So I went, I bought a 6-pack to give the instructor, and I walked into ProTech. Nice. I was like, wow, this place is awesome. I'm coming back here, and I've developed a pretty good relationship with them ever since.
Yeah. And you and I have had a discussion already. I'm over there in November to do some training with Patrick and some guided diving with Skanda in November. I can't wait. I've never dived with those guys before. Obviously, I've interviewed a bunch of them now. Tamara May, who's not there anymore, I don't think, but Skanda twice, and Patrick and Philip, who's associated with them. Just an amazing place, and I'm so looking forward to going there and diving with them.
Well, I'll be there in November, so hopefully we overlap while we're there.
We're going to try and make that happen, aren't we? So that'll be cool. And if we can go for a dive, we will. I've set myself a pretty intense training schedule, so I'm going initially to do Cave CCR. I'm excited to do that with them and test myself. And then I'm going to do the Sidewinder Normoxic Trimix course as well. And then go and do a few days with Skanda. So it's just going to be immense. I just can't wait.
I'm jealous. I'm looking to start my Sidewinder training, and to go with Patrick, who's better than that? Skanda and another instructor there, Jake, might be right up there with Patrick.
Exactly. Yeah. What will be interesting for me is I actually trained with Edd Sorenson, who is the guy who helped develop the Sidewinder and is the kind of guru on the unit. But Patrick dives a little different, and Patrick trained with Ed, but now this is another world-class resource on the Sidewinder. Patrick's becoming the training director for KISS. So this is all closing the loop for me in terms of understanding how they set it up, how they dive it, looking at what I've got from what I learned from Ed, and then saying, okay, do I want to change some things? So I'm so excited to be able to do that. Again, for me, it's all about putting myself under a bit of pressure, learning as much as I can, becoming the best diver I can, and then experiencing the caves of Playa and Tulum. I'm counting the days. I've got one cave trip to South Australia again in September before then, and I've got to try and get myself in the water as much as I can. So I turn up, at least give the best impression of myself.
You'll do fine.
I'm sure I'll be all right, but I set very high standards for myself, and I want to make sure I go in there and give the best of me and then learn as much as I possibly can.
Well, again, I'm jealous. I dove with Ed. I've got a chance to dive at Ed's place. Mm-hmm. And my original thinking was maybe do my Mod 1 with Ed and then cave with Patrick. But I know there's a little bit of different styles, so the two best resources for
exactly. I treat all these things like a smorgasbord. When I turned up to Ed, he dives slightly differently to me. So he has his first stages out. I have them in more Mexico style versus what you might call Florida style. He said, oh, Steve, that's not going to work very well. I said, well, look, how about we wait till we put it in the water and then we can make a decision. So we got in the water. And the funny story, he said, oh, you've got your dry suit hose on wrong. And I said, no, Ed, this is the right way. Because the valves were round the other way, your dry suit hose goes over your long hose rather than under it. So it's all those little things that are slight differences. And what I really appreciated is at the end of it, provided I was good in the water, he was happy. And he gave his suggestions and then he let me go the way that I wanted to go, which is exactly the way I think instructors should do it. I had a great course with him and then did 4 days of guided diving with him afterwards, so all on the Sidewinder, and it was that experience of my life so far in diving, and I've been able to build on that now, but over 110 hours or so now, ready to do some more, and ready also to look at what Patrick does, and I'll just treat it all like a smorgasbord, or a buffet, as you might say there. Here's the bits I like, here's the bits I don't, and then just figure out the way that I want to do it.
That's something I discovered for myself. I did a lot of my progressive diving like in the beginning with the same instructor. I got to a point where I just started reaching out to other instructors just to pick up different things. It started with, I think everybody's probably read Shadow Divers. In that book, it always talked about John Chariton's preparation, how scientific and how intuitive he was with paying attention, planning. So even though I was Trimix certified, I went and I took another Trimix class with him just to kind of learn from him.
How did you find that?
It was awesome.
Yeah.
I was so impressed. Total gentleman. He's there for his students. You dive in the morning, you grab something for lunch, you go back to the shop, and he saturates you with information, but you leave with a comprehension of it. If you have a question, he's like, all right, let's plan it. And I was so impressed by that. And I so appreciative of it as well. Yeah. And then even with the cave training and the Sidemount training, I started with Max. And then once I started going to Mexico, I started reaching out to some, through ProTech and taking classes down there with guys. And it's the best thing I've ever done because, like you said, you get different people's perspectives, different people's tricks. So you borrow a little bit from each one, you steal a little bit from each one, and then you make it your own.
I did my advanced rec training with John as well. And my theory, a little bit like you, is you find out the instructors that you think that you'll resonate with. And in my case, I always look for who's the best in the world here, or at least the best that I can get to, and then go and train with them. And one of the things John did with us on the advanced rec course is we all had to lay our gear out on the pavement outside the dive shop. And we had to explain our gear and what each part was for and why we were doing it that particular way. And I think obviously he was looking for things that might be not so much wrong, but that might be a safety issue, which is great. But he also wanted to understand our equipment. John's obviously a twin set back mount diver and a rebreather diver, and there were two of us on the course in side mount, and he buddied us together. There was no issue with us diving side mount on his courses, and we did some really interesting stuff. I just loved the whole experience. You're right, all the planning was immense. Dive preparation, the dive briefing, the execution. He was there all the time. You never felt as if you had a problem. John wouldn't be right there beside you. And at the same time, when you came back to the shop, the stories in the afternoon. Fortunately, someone dies in a lot of his stories, right?
Yeah.
So we just sat there mesmerized. I remember one time we were talking about John lines, and then he said, "Oh, look, I'll make you guys some." So he grabbed some sisal rope, and he was doing an eye splice in this rope while he was telling stories to us, which in itself was something.
Yeah, same thing. He gave us a John line as well. Except I think I got his father's last one. It was a family heirloom.
There you go.
He says that with everybody that he gives a John line.
I thought I had that one.
Yeah, exactly. But a great experience. I was definitely in awe. I was like, this is probably the last time I'll ever be in, like, starstruck diving. And then I got to Mexico. I saw the way those guys do everything. And I was like, wow, I really like this as well.
Oh, well, we're going to catch up in November, but what's next for you? Is it your November trip, your next big trip?
I'm trying to get down there between now and then. A few weeks ago, I was lucky enough to sneak down in Florida real quick. I did a day on the Spiegel Grove, and then I came home. Amazing conditions. It was a couple of sharks, so that was great. And then it's summer here, and it's hot here, so I'll do some northeast diving for the rest of the summer. And as the fall comes, down to Florida for some caves and Mexico for some caves.
Yeah, it must be immense to be able to go to Florida, and you've got everything there, right? So you've got caves as well as wrecks and some nice reef diving there, to be honest, as well. And then, of course, Mexico's not so far either, is it?
It's just another hour. Going to Florida, like you said, I call it the sixth borough of New York. New York City has 5 boroughs.
Yeah.
The whole state of Florida is the sixth borough. But so it's an easy flight. And then the first time we went to Mexico, I was like, wow, this is just another hour. Pretty easy. And like I said, during the pandemic, the prices were so reasonable that it just made sense to go there constantly, you know. There were divers coming from all over the world, and I was able to meet so many great people. And like you said, kind of just interesting stories, have a drink with somebody at night, have dinner with somebody at night, and just, you know, meet a lot of great people, meet a lot of great individuals, get different people's experiences and their little tricks of the trade type of thing.
Yeah, it's a great thing about diving, isn't it? Because it really is a global sport as well, and or pastime, whatever we want to call it. And if you have the good fortune to go to these sort of places, I remember again my time in Malta and Gozo, not so much from the States, but we'd have a lot of people from Europe. I got to meet people from places that I'd never been. Yeah, it was awesome to be able to get different perspectives and then dive with them, and amazing experience.
I'm sure. Know? I'm lucky here in New York. I teach at a dive shop called Good Life Divers. The owner is actually, he owns a boat as well, so we do charters out of the dock, but he's built a nice community of technical divers and just former students. They come in. It's nice to have, you know, all those resources and people to share. Just hanging out at the shop, people come in and out, and, you know, you talk diving all day. And like, what's better than that, right?
Very little, put it that way. And have you had a crack at the Andrea Doria?
I haven't. John, pre-pandemic, did a couple of charters up here, and I wanted to do the U-boat that he discovered with him, but it filled up like right away, you know, so I haven't. So I think I'm going to try and knock out my CCR dive this year, and then maybe go do a crack when I can.
Yeah, Trimix is getting kind of expensive now, isn't it?
Yeah, it's expensive everywhere. It's just time, I think, for me. Like, I'm watching everybody and there were breathers, especially cave diving. And now I'm like, all right, I've been interested, and now it's time.
Yeah, you do need that. You need a reason to do it because it's a lot of money, and it's a lot of money not only on the unit, but training. Some people would say you take on a bit more risk. I don't think that's necessarily true. It's more complex than open circuit diving for sure. And you have to pay attention to that. And that's where the risk does come in. If you don't pay attention to it, you're asking for trouble. But if you're prepared to be detail oriented and make sure that you do your checklists and you never deviate from that and pay attention to that during your diving, then I think in many ways it can be safer because you've got so much gas available to you and duration, you've got time. And so if you want to go deeper or you want to go longer into an overhead, then it's the right tool for the job. And then it's a matter of which one you're going to choose. There's a bunch of them out there that are really good. And obviously the Sidewinder is one of those, and many very good divers are diving it now. That's how I got onto it.
Aside from the instructors, like I said, all the people that were coming from Europe and all, they were all diving Sidewinders in Mexico. It's territorial, right? Like where you go, a unit seems to dominate.
Well, it's been awesome to meet you, catch up, and learn a little bit about what you're doing there and how you got into Sidemount and how that supports your diving. And now we've arranged to meet up in person, so that's going to be absolutely brilliant. And again, I really appreciate you being a patron of the show. It does make a difference. It's amazing how, because this isn't my full-time gig, I have to do this in my spare time. And I wish it could be a full-time gig, but it's not. So it's important that I'm able to get some support, and again, I really appreciate it. So thanks so much.
Nah, thank you. Like, it's funny, like you said, we talked about the pandemic. I look so forward to the new episodes during the pandemic. You so many great people on that. It was great, and I learned so much. So thank you for bringing this platform out to everybody. It's great.
You're most welcome. Most welcome.
Hey, thanks for listening, and I hope this special episode brought back some awesome memories. I feel like I've missed so many great segments, especially from the more recent episodes. Let me know if you enjoyed this and you want more. If there's enough interest, I'll try and comb through some more and produce the best of part 2. Thanks again to XDEEP, our sponsor, and to the patrons of Speaking Sidemount, and I'll catch you in the next episode.
You've been listening to Speaking Sidemount from www.sidemountpros.com. If you like the podcast, please subscribe and consider leaving us a 5-star review. If there's something you'd like us to cover on the show, then let us know via our Facebook page listed in the podcast notes. Thanks again, and we look forward to you joining us on our next episode of Speaking Sidemount.